Hello, and welcome back to what is, unexpectedly, going to be the final leg of this journey. I say that because there were originally planned to be 4 additional instalments of this series, but something significant happened at the end of this leg that led to the abandonment of my desire to film anything more. And at the end of the last video, I had travelled to a friend's house, and inevitably, the ensuing night was a long one filled with lots of beer. I hadn't drank more than a pint or 2 since New Year's, so suffice to say that the next day I was feeling horrendous. There were more beers the next day. That always helps on a hangover, and so we begin this video after the weekend as I make my way back northwest, beginning here in Blackheath in the southeast. We're now in Greenwich, and before I left London for the countryside in 2019, this is the borough in which I lived. And if I ever did move back, I think it's the borough I would return to. Unfortunately, these barriers are currently preventing visitors from getting a good view over the lookout point, so here's a photo of the view. Over here is the Shepherd Gate clock, which was the first public display of Greenwich Mean Time in 1852. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think GMT, or UTC to some people, is determined by the moment the sun crosses the Greenwich Prime Meridian, the self-declared centre of the world, at a certain time of year. The meridian is displayed just back there, but it's always surrounded by people. It's just a line on the ground at 0 degrees longitude. This is the old Royal Naval College, designed by Sir Christopher Wren, and built beginning 1696. It is located in front of what was once the personal house of the Queen of England, built in 1616. This is the Cutty Sark, one of the fastest clipper ships ever built. It was built in 1869 to transport tea back from China, but has travelled all over the world. It was still being used in 1954. That's 85 years on the sea for a largely wooden boat. I get the DLR as far as it will take me, to Bank, and here we see the monument to the Great Fire of London. This marks the spot where the fire began in 1666. Actually, the fire started 60 metres away, in a bakery on Pudding Lane. Here's the Bank of England, and this is where it all began, in 1694, the start of the end of the world, the model for all central banks across the globe, and the backbone of our current political vision for human society, market capitalism. And just around the corner we have St. Paul's Cathedral, which one might have thought to be an unlikely bed partner to the Bank of England, but apparently not. I'm sure there will be some kind of horseshoe theory that can explain it all. And up there is the counterpart to the Great Monument, the Golden Boy of Pyre Corner, which marks the spot where the Great Fire was finally stopped. That building over there is a spot I spent many a late night once upon a time, the world-famous nightclub Fabric. I'm now getting the Metropolitan and Jubilee lines to the end of the line, and in addition to the DLR which I took earlier, in my opinion, I've been on only the 3 best train lines in London today, so that's nice. This is Stanmore, and it's as far as I can go on the tube network. I've still got an hour to walk back to my car. I also didn't set off in the quickest direction because I thought this road up here looked interesting and I wanted to see where it went. I walked, and I walked, and I walked. And also, something I've not mentioned today is that my Achilles is pretty much unusable now. I'm certain that as soon as I get back to bed and get up in the morning, it's going to be game over as far as walking is concerned. I'm really just being stubborn at this point by continuing to use it. I've got a few minutes to spare here, so I'm going to see how fast I can summarize the process of waking up. You begin from a position of addiction to pleasure. This is natural. It is a consequence of our perception of ourselves as individual egos that have been birthed into a world beyond our control. As you have no certain knowledge, the only thing for you to do is to seek out your own advantage and try to reduce your feelings of uncertainty by developing beliefs that are reasonable enough to be true. There is nothing to imply that morality is anything more than one's approval or disapproval of given ideas and actions, so it is simply rational for you to act in your own self-interest. But then you become aware of the profound suffering and evil of the world. It does something to you. It makes you realize how deluded mankind must be, that our greed and hatred far exceed what would be sufficient for our security and self-preservation, that the beliefs of mankind serve only to facilitate its own self-destruction, that ideologies are precisely the problem. You recognize a force within you, compassion, empathy. It matters not that there are no external rules telling you what is right and wrong. You learn to feel love, and this love does not judge. You devote yourself to spreading the ideal of kindness and unity, abandoning ideology for a direct experience of the one thing you can know for sure, your own awareness. So, you exchange your focus on pleasure for a focus on righteousness. Now you feel like you are making progress. You may even perceive yourself as having woken up, but still, you suffer. You are now in a battle against the ego, against all the greed and violence of the world. You exist in this state for many, many years. But one day, you have an experience, and in this experience, you see the true meaning of non-duality. Pleasure and righteousness depend on each other, because the ego and awareness depend on each other. An addiction to either is a desire for only one of the two to exist, and this is fundamentally contrary to how reality is able to exist. You see that your addiction to righteousness is ultimately not that different from an addiction to pleasure. You see that it is still an act of the ego, an ideology, that there is an independent, fundamental reality that you have interpreted as the essence of yourself. But in an act of pure selflessness, you abandon that addiction, and now you are left with nothing. Nothing to strive towards, nothing to believe in, nothing to do. Now you understand the meaning of life. Peace. For peace is the perfect equality of righteousness and pleasure, and that which must exist in order for either to arise, because desire and non-desire, addiction and peace, delusion and awakening also depend on each other. You have made yourself empty, and so now you have been filled. Your attention is no longer limited, and thus you have actually become awake.
Here's Tom with the weather.
I eventually get back to my car and was happy to see it hadn't been stolen or vandalized. I chill for about an hour, exhausted from the weekend, and then drive a short distance to Hertford in the direction of Cambridge before finding somewhere to sleep. Pardon my French, but the next day it is pissing it down with rain. Last night was a bit of an event. At around midnight I was about to stop and go to sleep when it occurred to me that I had run out of drinking water. All the petrol stations were only serving fuel, and I couldn't find any public water outlets in the town. I tried looking in a park, and then I tried looking in a graveyard, because I thought there might be a tap for watering flowers, but unfortunately, the entrance to the graveyard was locked. I eventually drove past a train station where there was a night worker doing some work. I asked if I could go inside to use the bathroom, and he let me in. I went to the bathroom, filled up my bottle, and went back to my car. When I got to my car, I couldn't find my keys. I worried for a moment that I could have somehow locked them inside the car, which wouldn't have been ideal at past midnight on the outskirts of a town I didn't even know the name of. I went back to the bathroom in the train station, and fortunately I'd placed my keys down on the windowsill by the sink. I blame it on the heavy weekend. I then couldn't find anywhere appropriate to sleep, and when I finally did, it rained all night, which made it hard for me to sleep. So, I'm not feeling great today, to be totally honest, and to top it all off, the pain in my Achilles has now travelled halfway up the back of my leg. At this point, all I really want to do is go home. I'm worrying about money, and I'm worrying that these videos won't be very good, and that I'm wasting my time. But I remind myself that I'm not ultimately doing this for the videos, I'm doing it for myself, or at least I should be. As I ponder all this, I get a really strong urge that if I quit now, I might miss out on something important. I actually forgot about this urge until now, but I remembered it after reading my notes from the day. Ultimately, I decided to push on. My car is a bit of a mess following my time in London, so I decide to clean it up to reset my mind. After I'm done, I head to the nearby Wetherspoons to do some work. On the way, I walk past Royston Cave. I wasn't interested in paying £10 to go inside, but I did find this 3D model online. Apparently, it was discovered in 1742 by a man who was installing a new bench. The walls of the cave are covered with imagery supposedly relating to the Knights Templars. I get back to my car and drive to Cambridge. I chilled for the evening and got an early night. The next day, I'm in a strangely calm headspace. Unfortunately, much of the footage I took around Cambridge has mysteriously vanished. I'm sorry, Cambridge. You have a beautiful city, but I won't be able to advertise it here. Luckily, I do have some footage. As I was walking, I noticed this little sculpture on the floor. I googled it and discovered that it is the work of an anonymous local artist, and that there are quite a lot of these so-called dinky doors scattered around the city. I acquired a map of the doors and found all the ones that were close to the city centre. I ended up walking for many hours this day, and yes, my leg is still in agony. And at around midnight, while I was walking beside the river, I start to notice a sensation I am all too familiar with. It's almost like a smell. It was the sensation of the mystical state, an awareness of the fundamental complementary relationship that leads to the creation of the world. Only this time, it was different. I don't want to get into it all here, I'll talk about it in a separate video, but suffice it to say that I proceeded to experience the most profound hour of time I have ever experienced in my life. My mind was flooded with understanding. And as a result of this experience, my desire to do anything faded. In particular, my desire to continue recording footage for these videos vanished. I suddenly did not care. And so, we're actually only about halfway through what I actually had planned for these videos, but I didn't want to continue. I was in a state of awe, and I had no interest in doing anything other than experiencing this perfectly peaceful state. I wasn't quitting. This had nothing to do with the doubts I had the previous days. I just simply no longer had a goal, so there was nothing to quit. I found what I had come to find. The journey was a success. The next day, I did record a tiny bit of my visit to Ely, particularly the cathedral there, but I knew that I'd already given up at this point. I spent the remainder of my time away just wandering around, without any care for recording. I visited several towns as I slowly made my way back home, and almost a week later, I arrived at Stonehenge, where I was originally planning to end my trip. I did record this because I knew I would still make videos out of the footage I did have, and it was always my plan to end it here, with the sunrise on the longest day of the year. It really was a magical experience. I hope that a fragment of that magic will come across on camera. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned to learn what happened on that fateful night in Cambridge. Embedded within the annals of Stonehenge's lore lies a humorous vestige of 19th century tourism. When the philosophical waves of Romanticism encouraged a deep appreciation for ruins and relics, visitors to Stonehenge engaged in a practice most anachronistic by today's standards. Picture, if you will, an era where one could simply stroll up to the revered stones and, for a modest fee, rent a hammer from a local blacksmith to chip away a personal fragment of this ancient wonder. Enthusiastic Victorian families, wide-brimmed hats providing modest shade, gathered around the colossal stones, striking the lithic behemoth with enthusiasm, dislodging a shard destined for the mantelpiece back home. This practice, though seemingly absurd, grants us a window into the shifting attitudes towards cultural heritage. It was only under the enlightened auspices of governmental intervention that such activities were curtailed, recognizing the need to preserve the integrity of this prehistoric site for posterity. Today, the public are permitted to enter the sacred ring and touch the stones only twice a year, at the summer and winter solstices.
Oh, it's coming.